So both tombs stand the difference is really that the Taj Mahal is placed at the end of a large complex, and at the end also of this Chaharbagh, this cross-axial Persianate type of garden, while Jahangir's tomb is placed in the center of it, which was a more conventional form of placing a Mughal tomb. But both have a chilukhane, and it's here in Jahangir's tomb that we come across this feature for the first time, and the historians of Shah Jahan tell us, when they describe the chilukhane of the Taj Mahal, that it was built on the model of the one of Jahangir's tomb. So this would be another common feature, and we can also use the tomb of Jahangir to the Taj in the use of the four large minarets. And what is particularly close is the pietra-dura decoration of the cenotaph. I really believe that the same group of artisans was employed here. It's also possible that the cenotaph of Jahangir was actually even done perhaps at Agra and then brought to Lahore. So what I have just been there again last Friday with Professor Abdul Rahman of the University of Technology and Engineering, who is an old friend and with whom I really have talked a lot about Mughal architecture. So we were there, and I was stunned again by the exquisiteness of this pietra-dura work, which as you perhaps know, this very fine form of stone intarsia came originally from Florence. So of course, stone intarsia was known in India over the century, but that's a very fine technique where not one single piece of stone is put into the hollowed out shape, in the surface of the marble, but the composition of tiny pieces of semi-precious stone, which are then polished when the surface is polished, so one doesn't see where the pieces come together, and so in a way it creates the effect of painting in stone, and requires great skill on the part of the artist to handle this. Now, as I said, the Mughals knew pietra-dura from Europe. Here would be the work in the Taj Mahal. So we have very similar flowers. This was the cenotaph of Mumtaz, and here's the cenotaph of Shah Jahan. And the Mughals knew this technique from work brought from Florence as gifts. We have literary statements that these were diplomatic gifts, and also from artists who worked at the Mughal court. And the evidence for this is the great throne wall in Delhi, the wall behind the throne, where we have Florentine and pietra-dura work. This is black tablets, supplemented by Mughal pietra-dura work. And this would be the cenotaph of Jahangir at Shadara. And you see the flowers are done in a very naturalistic manner, more naturalistic than the flowers on the cenotaph of Mumtaz Mahal. And to the purifying waters of one of the holy rivers of India, preferably the Ganges or the Jamuna, and even building a tomb, over a body would also be impure. So, and in the Islamic tradition, the issue is more complicated. It was from the beginning a controversial issue, because a number of hadiths, I'm sure you know all what hadiths are, so I don't have to explain it. So they declare tombs as non-religious, as Hessen, they forbid praying at tombs and they see this as a polytheistic habit, and also they are against distinguishing tombs with inscriptions. And of course, they speak above all about raising large domed structures over them, which was seen as the most ostentatious form of a burial. Because this was the argument of the religious, that building a large tomb over a burial could give rise to the cult of death, to a cult of the death, and to idolatrous worship. And indeed, for the majority of Muslims, a cemetery is indeed a sort of holy place, seeing that it contains tombs of persons, of individuals which were venerated in Islam. And visiting these tombs, doing a ziyarat, is a means to associate oneself with the spiritual power, with the barakat of the buried person, who is conceived in a way as being present in the tomb. Now, so this is the opinion of those who are against tombs. But we have also those who speak in favor of tombs, and this evidence has been put very well together by Abba Daneshwari on his book. It's a small book, but very useful, on medieval tomb towers in Iran. So now, those who argue in favor of tombs, they regard them as legal and non-objectionable as long as they are not too ostentatious, and not strive for pomp and vainglory. Then it's felt that they are, that they can provide paradisical conditions for the person who is buried here. These paradisical conditions, which after all promise to the faithful in paradise. So tombs provide paradisical shadow. This is also trees can do, like here on this image. Then the height can symbolize closeness to God, and when they are four-sided or eight-sided, they would sort of be an allusion to the 4 or 8 stages of paradise, which they are perceived according to certain ideas, about.
Ebba, if I may ask a question at this point, other than purely reasons for having a physical presence, is there a practical reason for the dome?
For the dome?
Do we need a span-free space? Do we need to have a big dome?
No, you don't need to have a big dome.
Okay.
What you need? What you need is, wait, I'm just going to... Yeah.
For the pigeons to sit.
Yeah, no, you don't need it.
So out of these 4 buildings, it's like the most... Akbars and Jahangirs, they really do stand out. How come they've gone for this format and not the usual?
Yeah, no, I'm sort of explaining this now because now I have established the parameters of, in a way, what the problems are. Yeah, right. And now we are looking at the reaction of the Mughals to it. But obviously, it's a good question, and it jumps to the eye. Yeah. So right. So we have now we have what is against it, and for it would be to provide paradisical condition for the deceased. And here, as we see, the dome will play a role, yeah? So right. But obviously, the dome was the most, from the point of view of the Orthodox, it was the most objectionable feature. Yeah. So anyway, but this ambivalent position of tombs explains why in certain areas of the Islamic world they are hardly used, yeah? Or in others, they are really, you have a great number of them, especially here in the Indian subcontinent. Yeah, now if we now look at the Mughals, So obviously the ancestor Timur had been, it's by the way interesting that so many men in Lahore are called Timur. Anyway, there must be a Mughal connection. So the Mughal ancestor Timur was built in a splendid tomb in the Gure army at Samarkand, while Babur was buried in a simple tomb, in one of that's my theory, in one of the cemeteries of Kabul, around which Akbar built a large garden. This will come in an article which I have written. It wasn't originally a garden. So when we have this differing shape of tombs, and then we have also occasional statements. And when we put all this evidence together, we can understand how the Mughals handled this issue. But our most important evidence is the built evidence, are the buildings themselves. So as Shah Jahan's historian Lahori says, they speak to us with a mute tongue, Besaban, Bisabani, once we have understood the language. So this would be right. So then we have Babur in this simple tomb, which had just a railing around it, and obviously no great building over it. And this form of building has been called Hasira, and the Mughals called this cenotaph, which has a form like a sarcophagus. It's a very common form in the Islamic world. They call it Surat Makat or Surat Kabra. So, I have this slide. I wasn't sure whether I put it in. That's a recent reconstruction with Ratish Nanda has put in, which is very controversial. I mean, I'm talking a lot with Ratish Nanda, who is doing now Humayun's tomb restoration in Delhi, because he took this from a drawing from Mason, and we are not even sure whether Masons really looked at Babur's tomb when he did this. So it is it's a very strong reconstruction, but originally it certainly, not even certain that it had a hasira around it, but if it had, it would be a hasira burial. Yeah. Now, the next tomb, in the line of the imperial mausoleums, the tomb of Humayun at Delhi, which was built by his son Akbar, couldn't represent a greater contrast because it's a large domed mausoleum, and it stands in a center of a large Chaharbagh. So it's placed on a podium, and its ground plan is very intricate. It takes a Hasht Behish plan 4 times to multiply this paradisical symbolism. And also the facing of the tomb with red sandstone and white marble has a strong symbolic connotation, because when I looked at the Shastras, the ancient Indian books about how to build correctly, then white is recommended as a color for the Brahmin and red as a color for the Kshatriyas, as a warrior caste. So it seems the Mughals wanted to show we are the new Kshatriyas and the new Brahmins of our times. In architecturally, because we don't have anything like that in the text. So this is I think why discussion of architecture is so important also in a literary festival, because they speak to us. They present evidence. All right. So obviously, Humayun's tomb, the Mughals they didn't come here as the first to construct mausoleums. They had to face this long tradition of the Sultanate to raise mausoleums, and we have this splendid tomb here in Sasaram of Sher Shah Suri. So then when we, so the monumentality and the splendor of Humayun's tomb ignored obviously all orthodox concerns, And even more, from the very beginning, Humayun's tomb became the place of a dynastic cult. Because first the emperor would go to Nizamuddin's tomb, and then they would circumambulate the tomb of Humayun. They would do a ziyarat, it's called like this in the sources, and with a ritual tawaf, with a ritual circumambulation. So there couldn't really be a greater contrast between the tomb of Babur at Kabul and what was done here for Humayun at Delhi. Now, if we come to the tomb of Akbar at Sikandra, the picture gets more complex. It was built by his son Jahangir as it was completed in 1612 or 13. So it's larger than Humayun's tomb, but it's of an entirely different shape. So both are placed in the center of a large Chaharbagh, but Akbar's tomb looks completely and totally different. So the feature it shares with Humayun's tomb is this large monumental platform here. Yeah? But then on the platform, instead of a domed mausoleum, we have these stepped terraces which are receding. In the Indian or South Asian, one could say, post and lintel constructions. So it's a monumental structure, but despite of its monumentality, it clearly aims at orthodoxy, because on the top we do not have a dome, but we have something like a Hazira burial, namely an cenotaph open to the sky, open to the blessings of the clouds, surrounded by a marble screen. So if you look back, this would be the top, and here we have it when we look inside. So, and the actual grave was here in the platform. This was the usual way of doing it, to have two tombs. So also in Humayun's tomb we have an upper cenotaph, but under the dome, while here it's open to the sky. And this, so in a way, one could even consider it as a subversive response to the law, yeah? A sort of semantic tour de force of interpreting the plinth, just the plinth, if we take just the plinth, to interpret it as a monumental mausoleum. So everything what is, here, beneath the white top, would then be just a magnified plinth. And in this way, it was possible, to combine the desire for a monumental mausoleum with the wish for an orthodox burial under the open sky. And interestingly, this goes really back to Jahangir himself, because he tells us in his autobiography that when he came back from the north, from Lahore, by the way, where he had been pursuing to his rebellious son, he saw the tomb of his father, and he was really sort of quite astonished. The architects had built it after their own ideas. So, and he didn't like it and had it pulled down in places, but in consultation with men of superior knowledge. So for once, it's the only time when the Mughal emperors acknowledge the existence of this body of thinkers, behind them. So, Sahibe Mardume Wukuf, that's the term which he's using. So, and raised it anew. So it's exactly as he wanted it. And also it had a great impact. Yeah, right. And some scholars didn't really like the idea of the oh, this can't be mine, hopefully, no?
No.
So some scholars didn't like the idea of they couldn't live with it. They found it, they didn't understand the intention behind it. I'm quoting Arnaud here, who projected this large dome in the center of the Hazira, but is completely misunderstanding the intention of the tomb. So, and also we can see, as I said, it really established the model for a whole group of tombs where
but
we have...
Ebba, it's really interesting. Etimad-ud-Dawla and Jahangir's tomb seem like the obvious comparison. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's both forms of a Tachtgar tomb, of this platform tomb. But here we have a little... Here we'll have a little sort of, not a dome, but a sort of baldachin with a slightly rounded structure. So it's a sort of thing in between the two. But here we have obviously nothing. And the tomb, yeah, now we have arrived at your tomb, at the tomb of Jahangir at Lahore. So Agra has the tomb of Akbar, Delhi has the tomb, of course also the Taj Mahal, Delhi has the tomb of Humayun, Lahore has the tomb of Jahangir, and Lahore was really very much his city in a way, though he also did a beautiful palace here though, with very interesting and extraordinary decoration of tile work. Anyway, I can't discuss it now. So, but so we have to understand the tomb was built probably under the supervision of Nur Jahan, his very ambitious wife. I'm sure you all know about her. And in a way, it was also a way to keep her busy at Lahore, you know. And but obviously, an enterprise of this nature couldn't have been done without the emperor's financial support, and also the first, as we have seen, the first-class workers were employed in it. So now, Jahangir himself had willed, and we know this from several of the authors, Kambo, Kasvini, also Kalim, say so, that his tomb should be, according to the Sunni faith, in the tradition of Emperor Babur, without the ornament of a building, and be entrusted to the divine favor in an open space, so that it may always benefit from the countless clouds of divine forgiveness with any obstacles. I mean, since this is a board, I can read it out. Do we have time? Or perhaps? So anyway, I just shorten it, yeah. So I have given you the gist of it. And so basically it was according to his wish to be in this, in this way. And again, the dilemma to combine an imperial wish for a simple burial in this case, and what one felt was appropriate, you know, for a tomb, was solved in taking the idea from Akbar's tomb and by then the widely used platform tombs, because originally, and this apparently has been taken away by Ranjit Singh probably, originally it had a cenotaph at its top, which was also ornamented with beautiful pietra dura flowers, as Surah de Kaaba, as Surah de Markat, as the historians of Shah Jahan describe it, with this flower work. So it shows Jahangir also in a new light, because he's often portrayed as a sort of hedonist, only inclined to wine and other things, you know, and yeah, women obviously also, and but as a patron of architecture, he took a very active part in the debate about lawfulness of tombs, and found a strikingly ingenious solution in the tomb of his father Akbar, and also for his own tomb, to solve the problem how to reconcile an orthodox burial with imperial monumentality. Now, in the Taj, yeah, we have it here. So we have the empty platform which had a cenotaph on top, and here's the real one in the platform. Yeah, just also, I mean, we get interesting statements from Kalim that the sandstone came from Fatehpur, which faces the outer platform. And yeah, the British sort of at one point built up this little sort of, there was a hole in the ceiling. Someone had put a hole in the ceiling, perhaps to convey the blessings of the clouds directly to the lower cenotaph. And then the British built the structure over it, but it was taken away in 1906. So yeah, here obviously we have the most ostentatious form of a mausoleum in the Taj Mahal, which was built, as I have explained, at about the same time, finished a little later. It was also, that's also different, put into a very large complex. Here we have the tomb garden, but here we had a bazaar and caravanserai complex, which took up the idea of the cross-axial Chaharbagh division. Here the walkways are expressed in bazaar streets and the parterres with caravanserais. So this would be the various elements, and then we have absolute symmetry in the planning of this large complex. But we have a slight bow. Now we come to the dome, to orthodoxy, because when we take this part alone, it looks like an Orthodox Hasira burial put under the dome, which according to this line of thinking would be what the dome had been since centuries, namely a symbol of the sky. So it would be, this would be, then, if it's taken in a symbolic way, it would be still an Orthodox burial. Okay? Yeah, now to look just at the end, Aurangzeb, he sort of was the first Mughal emperor who spoke out openly against the construction of tombs, and also he was especially against pilgrimage of women to the grave of saints, which he found problematic. But he distanced himself from his own, words, and in his early practice, when he had Ustad Uttar al-Rashidi, by the way, the eldest son of Ustad Ahmed Lahori, built the tomb of his wife at Aurangabad. But he himself was built at Aurangabad in a simple burial, and also from then onwards the Mughal emperors didn't build any large mausoleum. Shah Jahan's daughter, Jahanara, is built near the tomb of the saint of Nizamuddin in Delhi, and a tablet here says, "Let nothing but grass grow over my tomb, because this is a befitting burial for the fakirs." She uses this word. And then also the later Mughal emperors were built in simple tombs in Muslim dargahs, but the tradition of raising large tombs was taken up by regional sort of governors and rulers, and even the Hindu Rajas now built huge chhatris which are empty. These are not tombs, these are just empty structures called chhatris in their memorial. And in this way the tradition of the Mughal mausoleum sort of can say was still kept a bit alive. Thank you.
Kamil Saab, Nayyar Saab, can we even begin to compare Jahangir and Taj Mahal?
Kamil, can you do it? I can't.
Well, there are obviously a number of stories which Ebba has masterfully just touched upon, and I'm sure each one of them are worth exploring in much more depth, and we need to understand the issues, some of them that you've raised. The whole development of the monumental tomb as such, you have pointed out some very fundamental theoretical and ideological questions, and it's really very intriguing. I think we would like to know more about a construction of the history of the monumental funerary structures which, to my knowledge, has not brought in this particular perspective of the opposing views between the orthodoxy opposition to any structures on a grave on the one hand, and on the other, the widespread practice throughout Islam of actually building monumental tombs. Then there are so many other aspects, stylistic, structural, decorational details. I'm sure that each one of these could be another project for someone like you. But there's so many questions that have been thrown up, which really are fascinating.
But if Uncle Nayyar, if we were to bring in the urban aspect behind these ostentatious buildings,
I was coming to that tradition. One is live tradition, and another is tradition which has to be studied and preserved as history. Applying this gathering being connected with the festival, I would like to move the stress from technical session to a little wider angle of how are we influenced by the Mughal architecture today, right? How does it affect our lives or our projects? And now one can learn a lot if you go into the spirit of Mughal architecture, which is use of space, use of water, use of gardens. It shouldn't be now trying to imitate the same domes now. I won't think they'll be viable or they'll be desired. So this is what, and instead what we have done, instead of learning from these remarkable lessons from there, of using climatology, using the ecological solutions, which are absolutely remarkable. Instead, we make modern structure and paste arches and domes over it.
But you're most famous for your arches, and he's most famous for his domes. So.
But there's a difference in how you use them, One is a pastiche manner of stick it on, artificially cosmetic manner, and the other is to use them with a genuine sense of structure. And this has been terribly misused, and we have such bad examples, like in Islamabad, we have a fire station जिधर मुझे के आज़ान देने को दिल करता है. There's a dome, and this is one. The famous architect Ponti was about to commit suicide. उसके जो blocks थे auditorium पे, उसपे आर्चें चिपका दी हैं chairman CDA ने, and the same manner, a friend of mine, Shahid Ahmed साहब मेरे सामने बैठे हुए हैं. In his period, he had asked me to come to a committee to see that there were Badshahi Masjid type domes on the airport of Lahore. So, and this was the desire of the boss to have them there. So we said, sir, we shouldn't be having them. So why they're costing a lot of money and serving no purpose? Never mind, symbolic, and it is relating to Lahore and Badshahi Masjid. It's not such a bad idea. Then we had to take help from the aviation people, who gave us a verdict that domes are very dangerous for pigeons. Who is going to convince them that ये मज़ार नहीं airport है? तो इस basis के ऊपर, इस basis पे हमारी जान छूटी और उसमें 8 करोड़ रुपया बच गया. तो शाहिद साहब को मैंने कहा जी 4 करोड़ तो मुझे पहुँचा दें आप, because I have helped you save this money. So tradition can be very dangerous. But I'm not trying to put you off tradition. Tradition must be followed, but in a constructive, realistic manner, and with a lot of study and knowledge about it. If you know nothing about it, you can only produce pastiche and cosmetic images.
But now Kamil Saab's work is certainly.
Yeah. No, so you would suggest that the Mughal should be. You would suggest that the Mughal should be taken as a model in the carefulness about using domes in which context? I mean, about sort of really considering where does a dome make sense and where does it not make sense, obviously. Yeah,
yeah, certainly on the airport it's not necessary.
It's not, no, obviously not.
I'd rather put it on a mosque.
No, and I also want to come back to what Kamil Mumtaz had said. So obviously, this issue hasn't been given much attention. Yeah, I mean, there basically, I know of 2 papers. One is by Thomas Leiston in Mukanas, who talks about orthodoxy, in the use of land in connection of Egypt, and also Michael Brandt, who has looked at the Mughals. But generally there isn't much awareness of it. But I spent now 4 months in Istanbul, and I had a seminar with my students, so I made them look into the issue. And there's an interesting, practice in Istanbul. They would do an octagonal tomb, and then they would put a cast iron, a dome of cast iron ribs on it, so it's open to the sky, but it still has a dome. So this would be another solution.
We have to close the session in a couple of minutes, so...
Oh, we have to stop it at...
we have about 2 minutes.
Oh, okay. I thought it was going to 3:45, or 5, I mean.
Unless there's any question.
Is there any question? Guys, can you get
There is one.
Hi, do you mind just coming down a little? Thank you.
I was just wondering, it's a question for Dr. I have a question for Dr. Ebba. I was wondering that the tomb of Hazrat Salim Chishti at Fatehpur Sikri is covered, and then the tomb of Hazrat Nizamuddin Auliya at Delhi is covered. So I was wondering, how does that tradition compare of the Sufi saints with those of the Mughal empires?
Yeah, obviously the Sufis, would not really represent strict, orthodoxy in the Islamic context, too. So it was a form of Islam which obviously would not keep to strict orthodoxy. Yeah, too. And in any case, the tombs were built by the emperors, too. So they wouldn't want to have it for themselves. But obviously, it would be interesting to look into texts, of Sufis writing about it. So, yeah?
Okay, Doctor, my question is that while studying these eternal rest house of those Mughals, whom I label as a splendid example of inherited fools, who were building these tombs.
You have a question.
I have a question. Yeah. Do you find any metaphysical relation between these buildings, these tombs of Mughal emperors, or can we label them as fractals?
As what?
As fractals.
Fractal. It's a kind of mathematics.
Okay. So?
Can we label them as fractals?
In which way you mean? Good.
Any metaphysical relation between these buildings?
I think Kamil Saab can answer this.
Okay.
No, there's so many questions, of course. We require maybe many similar sittings to address each one of these questions. There's a fascinating question raised here. A lot of... I would just like to close by really drawing attention to what I think is the basic question. What should be our attitude towards this heritage in architecture? How do we deal with it? And I think if we take up the 2 streams which Dr. Ebba has referred to, the orthodoxy on the one hand, and I don't know how you would call it, you just referred to Sufi issue. Now, I think the whole lesson from what we've been shown here, and we ought to give it more thought, is that there are, to anything like this, there are 2 aspects. There is the letter and the spirit. And you could say that practically of the divine scriptures as well. You could take the Quran for the letter and the spirit. And it's these 2 approaches that have produced many different directions. We have the whole body of the Kalam literature and the Sharia traditions arising out of those who will nitpick and get into the nitty-gritty little details of, is this right, is this according to Sharia, is this the right length, and so on. So that's one approach. Whether the dome has a practical reason, how many pigeons it can accommodate, is that important? At the other hand, why were all these buildings built at all? And I think that is, from the other direction, those who are more drawn to the spirit rather than the letter. And in celebrating and the spirit, we have produced the greatest body of art, architecture, poetry, painting, some of the most beautiful art created by mankind has come out of those who have approached Islam in its true spirit. So I think we could just leave with that thought. Are we going to get tangled up and caught into these so many cobwebs of the letter, or shall we celebrate the spirit?
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen,
may I ask a quick question? My question is for Professor Koch. Thank you so much for your great survey on Mughal funerary architecture. I was curious to know how the Qubbat al-Khadra, the green dome over the Prophet's tomb, did it ever feature in this debate of, to have a dome or not over a tomb in the Mughal context? Because of course, the Qubbat al-Khadra is a precedent for a dome over a tomb, and not just any tomb, but the tomb of the Prophet in Medina.
Sorry, this is a mosque, but I'd let someone else answer that.
No, it is a mosque. The great mosque of the Prophet is a mosque, but it also contains the tomb of the Prophet. And the dome was placed over the tomb of the Prophet. And I was just curious to know whether this ever featured in, the debate over having
it features in a debate in a literary sense, because even for the Taj Mahal, we have statements that it should be as holy as the tomb of the Prophet. Yeah, but it doesn't that's a rather rare statement, I would say. I felt as an architectural model, the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem played a greater role as a form, as a form, yeah. So.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have to close the session, but before that, I have to tell you that there will be a general closing session for the LLF, hall number 1 at 6 p.m., and we all hope to see you there. Thank you.